The Russia-Ukraine War, which began in February 2022 with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, has remained one of the most significant geopolitical crises in modern history. The conflict has resulted in thousands of deaths, massive destruction, and a severe humanitarian crisis. While the West, including NATO and the United States, has continued to support Ukraine, various efforts to negotiate a ceasefire or a peace agreement have so far been unsuccessful. Amid these developments, former U.S. President Donald Trump has repeatedly claimed that he could negotiate a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine if reelected. However, the feasibility and consequences of such an agreement remain widely debated. The current state of the war. As of 2025, the war remains unresolved, with Ukraine continuing to resist Russian advances while receiving Western military and financial aid. Russia has maintained control over several eastern and southern territories, including Crimea, which it annexed in 2014. Despite sanctions and diplomatic pressure, Russian President Vladimir Putin has shown no willingness to withdraw troops without significant concessions. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has firmly stated that Ukraine will not negotiate any deal that compromises its sovereignty or territorial integrity. Western nations, particularly the United States and the European Union, have played a crucial role in supporting Ukraine, providing billions of dollars in aid and military assistance. However, there has been growing fatigue among some Western nations regarding the prolonged nature of the conflict. This has led to discussions about the necessity of diplomatic efforts to find a resolution, with some leaders pushing for negotiations rather than continued military escalation. Trump's stance on the war. Former President Donald Trump, a frontrunner in the 2024 U.S. presidential election, has repeatedly claimed that he could end the war within 24 hours if reelected. While he has not provided detailed plans, he has suggested that he would leverage his relationships with both Putin and Zelensky to bring them to the negotiating table. Trump has also criticized the Biden administration's approach, arguing that excessive U.S. financial aid to Ukraine is unsustainable and that Europe should take greater responsibility for supporting Ukraine. Trump's foreign policy has historically favored a more transactional approach. During his presidency, 2017-2021, he had a relatively conciliatory stance toward Russia, often avoiding direct confrontation with Putin. He has suggested that a potential peace deal might involve Ukraine making territorial concessions to Russia in exchange for a ceasefire, a position that contradicts the Biden administration's firm support for Ukrainian sovereignty. Possible ceasefire agreement under Trump. If Trump were to negotiate a ceasefire agreement, it would likely involve intense diplomatic maneuvering. Some key elements that might be part of such an agreement include 1. Territorial concessions. Trump could push Ukraine to accept Russian control over Crimea and possibly parts of the Donbas region in exchange for peace. This would be highly controversial and likely opposed by Ukraine and its allies. 2. Security guarantees. To prevent future conflicts, Trump might negotiate security guarantees for both Russia and Ukraine, potentially including limits on Ukraine's NATO aspirations or a demilitarized zone between the two countries. 3. Economic and sanctions relief. Trump could propose a phased lifting of Western sanctions on Russia in exchange for troop withdrawals from certain areas or other commitments. 4. Western involvement reduction. Trump may push for reduced U.S. financial aid to Ukraine, arguing that Europe should shoulder more of the burden. This could significantly impact Ukraine's military capabilities and leverage in negotiations. Potential consequences of a ceasefire agreement. A ceasefire agreement brokered by Trump could have major geopolitical and humanitarian consequences, both positive and negative. Potential benefits. 1. End of bloodshed. A ceasefire could save lives by halting active combat, reducing civilian casualties and military losses. 2. Economic stability. With the war paused or ended, global markets could stabilize, reducing energy prices and food supply disruptions. 3. Diplomatic reset. A ceasefire could open pathways for longer-term peace negotiations and reconstruction efforts. Potential drawbacks. 1. Legitimizing Russian aggression. If Ukraine is forced to cede territory, it could set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts, encouraging other nations to pursue territorial expansion through force. 2. Weakening of U.S. global influence. If Trump pushes for an agreement that favors Russia, it could damage U.S. relations with European allies and NATO. 3. Ukrainian resistance. If a ceasefire is perceived as a betrayal of Ukraine's sovereignty, it could lead to continued underground resistance and instability. Conclusion. While Donald Trump has expressed confidence in his ability to broker a peace deal in Ukraine, the reality of such an agreement is highly complex. Any ceasefire arrangement would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Ukraine and Russia, but also for global politics. If Trump were to negotiate a deal, it would likely involve controversial compromises, and its success would depend on the willingness of both sides to accept terms that have so far been deemed unacceptable. Whether Trump's approach would bring lasting peace or further geopolitical instability remains uncertain, but his potential return to the White House could significantly reshape U.S. involvement in the Russia-Ukraine conflict.